And welcome to this webinar, which is held jointly between Bath and West Community Energy and Avalon Community Energy. And the subject of the webinar this evening is transforming home energy demand to a greener grid. And we'll also be introducing and launching the Flex Community Partnership and project and providing more information on that as well. My name's Sonia Bedford. I'm a renewable energy solicitor, but more importantly, I'm also a director of Bath and West Community Energy and Avalon Community Energy. So have a foot in both of those community energy organisations and very pleased to be involved in the Flex Community Project. I have a personal and professional interest in transforming home energy for a greener grid. I've done quite a lot of work on local supply with communities, and personally I also own an electric vehicle which I have on well, I actually don't own it. I lease an electric vehicle which I have on an agile tariff, which means that I get a cheaper electricity for charging, and it's all switched automatically through my smart meter and an app. So and that works really well, and I'm always interested in finding out and learning more about how we can reduce energy demand in our homes, and for the demand that we do have, using that as greenly as possible. I think this is absolutely the key to getting to our net zero targets. We've all got to look first at energy demand in homes, and then we've got to look at the renewable energy side of that. And I think Bath and West Community Energy and Avalon Community Energy are ideally placed to be providing both of those, or assisting with both of those solutions. So the format of this this evening is that we'll have a presentation from Pete Kapner first, and then we'll have a good question and answer session with a panel who I'll introduce to you later on, but they are people that you can see on your screen at the moment. And we're really hopeful that you'll submit lots of questions during the presentation from Pete tonight, and anything else that comes up through the conversation. As we mentioned earlier, and for those of you who may have missed that, please put your questions in the Q&A box that you can see below you, not the chat box. And then when the questions appear in the Q&A box, all of the participants can vote on those questions. And the questions with the most votes when we get to the panel session will be those that will be asked first. We'll try and get through all of the questions if we have time, but if we don't, as I say, we'll be answering those ones which have the most votes. Please, yes, use the chat for introducing yourselves, talking to each other about any solutions you might be using in your own homes, or any other general interest points around your energy use in the home as well. But don't put any questions in there. So slightly early, but giving us more time for questions and answers at the end in the panel session, I'm going to hand straight over to Pete Kapner, who has a presentation for us. And Pete is the Managing Director of Bath and West Community Energy. So welcome, Pete, and over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Sonia, and welcome to everybody here tonight from me as well. Great to see so many people. I'll just share the slides that I want to go through a bit of information about the context, looking at the challenges we face around renewable energy and directly linked to how we use energy in the home, and talk a bit about the importance of demand management and how we can play a role in that. And as Sonia says, lead into a bit of discussion about some of the projects that we're running with Avalon. I know that I was looking through the kind of list of participants. There are old friends, but new faces as well. So apologies for those that have heard me talk about BWC before, but I will start off with a bit of an introduction into who we are as an organisation, just to provide a bit of context. So, Bath and West Community Energy. We're a member-owned community benefit society established in 2010 to deliver clean local energy, community-owned for the common good. Important, therefore, as a community benefit society, we're set up to ensure that all benefits that we generate, surplus and the like, is recycled back into the business, the community business, or back into the community. We're set up from a governance point of view as one member, one vote. So members invest in the organisation. We use that capital to install renewable energy projects. We return a reasonable return to members, and all members have one vote regardless of shareholding. Importantly, as well as being not-for-profit distribution, we also have an asset lock, which means that we can't be asset stripped for commercial gain, if you like. All our assets have to be utilized for community benefit. So the same setup as Avalon Community Energy, exactly the same type of organization. So since 2010, we've raised the best part of 20 million through a mixture of shares, bonds, and from Triodos Bank to build over 12 megawatts of community renewables, enough to power 4,000 homes, mixture of ground mount solar, rooftop solar, one small water wheel. We don't have any wind turbines yet, but we're looking for sites, and we're hopeful that we might be able to, that the planning environment in our local area may change such that we stand a chance of getting wind turbines on site as well. From those projects, we generate electricity, sell to the grid, sell to consumers, and surplus that we generate, we, as I say, pay a reasonable return to our member investors, but we also return significant funds back into the community. To date, over £220,000 back via community fund, donated as grants, back to a wide range of projects. These are just some of those that we've funded to date. Really exciting to see community action take place in a wide range of contexts, from transport, or planting orchards, recycling, whole range of exciting stuff, inspiring stuff. So before we kind of talk about renewable energy and demand management, I think it's important just to put this into a context. We're familiar with this, but it's just helpful to be reminded that with climate change, we're not talking about a theoretical concept many years in the future. We're not talking about something that is a Chinese hoax, as some people might have called it. It is happening now, and at a scale that is having a significant impact, be it melting ice caps, unstable weather patterns. It's too late, as David Attenborough eloquently said recently, it's too late to avoid climate change. But not only that, the fact is that it will affect those that are most vulnerable, those that are least able to protect from the impacts of climate change the most. So where's the equity in that? And I think we, as the rich countries of this world, have a responsibility to really focus on how we bring down emissions. Again, as David Attenborough says, with sufficient vigor, that we can avoid the tipping points that make runaway climate change unstoppable. So there is a real urgency, and I find it myself really useful to keep reminding myself of that fact in the work that we do. We're talking about something that requires urgency from all of us. Climate change is clearly a massive subject. We're focusing here on energy, and in more particular, we're talking about electricity. Electricity is the part of the energy system that is facing both rapid change and rapid growth. So we've seen already a shift from centralized supply with large power stations delivering electricity down one way through the grid to us as consumers, to a more decentralized system with renewable electricity, small generators embedded within the distribution network, with homes, offices generating electricity themselves from solar panels, and also the range of electricity uses changing significantly as well. That process is quite a radical change, and we've seen that already over the last 10 to 20 years take quite significant impact. When I started working in this sector in the mid-80s, the CEGB, as it was then, Central Electricity Generating Board, would kind of hoo and ha when you would talk about, can we get renewable electricity installed on the grid? you might say, oh, well, maybe 20% if you're lucky. We're now at over 40% over the year of electricity generation from renewables, which is a major achievement, but only part of the way. So already a lot more decentralized than it was, but in order to get to a fully decarbonized grid, we're going to need to have far more renewables, which means that we can't just rely on offshore wind. We're going to need to see far more onshore renewables as well. So in order to get the scale of renewable energy installed, in order to see the change in the way that we as consumers have to engage with energy in a lot more proactive way, be it with electric cars, as Sonia was talking about, battery storage, generation on our roofs, massive change in the way that we look at energy, all of which, together with the kind of extension of renewable energy, needs far more consent at a local level than we currently see, albeit still at a very high level with over 80% people supporting renewable energy. But in order to see it actually delivered, we need that support engaged and empowered within the planning process to bring forward the sorts of renewables that we need to see. In order to do that, we need to build greater trust and consent in the transition that we're facing. And that's where we, as community energy groups, feel that we have a really important role to play in creating a bridge between the energy industry and consumers, and providing a translation service, if you like, for some of the complexity within the system, and hopefully drawing people into the debate and enabling people to take action more. But the other issue around this system change that we're seeing is an increasing need to focus on the balancing of supply and demand. Historically, that was done in a very different way than it will need to be done in the future. Because in terms of the electricity demand that we see now, whilst we talk about reducing energy demand, the reality is that we're going to be likely to be using more electricity, not less, because we know that we have to do something about heat and transport within our buildings, space heating and transport, primarily used for heating, for gas, and obviously petrol, oil for transport. We need to reduce and eliminate the use of these fuels in rapid time. So whereas not so long ago, the automatic assumption for space heating in the home, if you were connected to the gas grid, was high efficiency condensing boilers. Already we're seeing that from 2025, all new buildings are have to install some alternative, can't install gas. And we're already seeing a huge increase in the interest and take up of heat pumps for space heating and other renewable heat options. And of course, for transport, great surge in electric vehicles. Both of these areas, where there are also other options for electricity, hydrogen being the most obvious, and there's a lot of debate about hydrogen, and clearly hydrogen is going to be used for probably for transport and potentially for storage. Whether it will be used for space heating as well is an open question. Lots of challenges, not an issue that we're going to be looking at tonight, but interested in people's thoughts in the chat about that. So more electricity, not less, which means the pressure for renewables is going to increase even further. So we're not just moving from 40% to 100% of the existing amount of electricity, it's going to be an increased amount of electricity. So what would the CEGB kind of, if they still existed now, be saying? Well, interestingly, there's been a sea change in the way that the kind of, I guess the grandchild of the CEGB is now looking at it, the national grid. The national grid, and this is a quote from them from a recent report, so not a statement from XR as you might think, saying that actually they believe that they will be able to operate the electricity system on a zero carbon basis by 2025. We think it's difficult but achievable, and not only that, if we're going to make progress in addressing climate change, essential. This is a massive statement, and I was quite shocked actually to see them make these sorts of commitments. Pleased, but surprised that the steps were happening quite so quickly. But this is what we need. They're not saying it will be zero carbon by 2025, but they're saying that the system will be able to cope if the policies exist to create the zero carbon grid. So really by 2025, I just thought we might listen to the national grid. This is only a couple of minutes.
At National Grid ESO, our target is to be able to operate a zero-carbon electricity system in Britain by 2025, which means preparing the system to run purely on zero-carbon electricity, like wind, solar and hydropower, without relying on any carbon-based generators to balance the grid. We'd be the first system operator in the world to make the full transformation, and we're working hard to make it happen. Over the past 5 years, we're proud to say the average carbon intensity of our electricity system has reduced by 53%. Here's how. Firstly, reliance on coal-fired power stations has lessened, with all remaining UK coal plants to be shut down by 2024. And of course, we facilitated more sustainable electricity supplies to connect to the system, from wind farms, solar farms and biomass generators to the growing number of homes and small businesses with micro-generation of their own. We're also introducing new ways to balance the frequency of electricity in the system without using carbon. And then we have you to thank, because making a conscious decision to control your energy use, perhaps with the help of a smart meter, helps reduce the demand on the system and ease our transition to a greener electricity supply. We've still got a long way to go to reach our target, but we're committed to overcoming the challenges before us and working together to build a sustainable Britain for generations to come.
So interesting to reflect that it's not the industry that's standing in the way of the goals that we're all facing. I think the CGB would probably be turning in their collective grave now, but all good stuff. So the issues that we were facing, how do we deal with them? And clearly, if we're going to have 100% renewables or very close to it, we're going to need to deal with the intermittency, because the CGB had very real issues when they were talking about the limits on the grid. They just had a different sense as to how to deal with them. We are looking with renewables at an intermittent source that isn't as controllable. So we need to think, how do we deal with that? And secondly, grid capacity. We have a real challenge in getting the level of renewables onto our grid in order to get to where we need to get to. So starting with that, if we're looking at distributed generation, we're now looking at it installed on the low voltage network. This diagram is showing us the low voltage side. So from over here, which is a kind of substation, primary substation going down into the low voltage network, distributed generation in a way that we're not seeing it before. Now, historically, you might see this electricity going up the grid, and that creates real challenges because, and we've seen this in our local area, if a lot of this electricity ends up going up the grid in a way that it wasn't planned, it's going to require a degree of strengthening of the grid that's going to cost a fortune. And at the moment, that cost is not socialized, if you like, not paid by taxation. It's effectively paid by the people who install the systems, in this case, us, which means it's quite prohibitive. However, if we see more electricity demand on the low voltage grid from us converting gas to heat pumps or on EV charge points, we see increasing electricity here, which could balance the increased generation at a local level, which in turn could ease grid capacity constraints. If we can link these two together, and that's the big if, can we create a stronger link between the generation and the time of generation and demand when we want it? That's a big challenge. That's a big question, which we're, and many others are starting to think, how do we grapple with? And then on the intermittency issue, this graph here just quickly showing a typical average electricity demand during the day, with getting up in the morning, 8 o'clock, increase in electricity demand, goes down in the daytime, and then up in the evening when everybody comes home and starts using electricity. Clearly, during lockdown, this sort of profile changes a bit. And there's actually a really interesting whole set of points around that, which again, we won't have time to go into tonight. But the key issue is, of course, that particularly for solar generation produced during the middle of the day, there's a mismatch between the solar generation and the peak demand. How can we shift the solar generation to the peak by maybe through battery storage, or encourage people to shift from the demand to the middle of the day? And doing this has a big impact. So this is another graph which just compares the carbon intensity, i.e. how much carbon per kilowatt hour is generated during, again, a typical day. Red one is nationally and blue one is regionally within the Southwest. And you can see there's a massive difference between the two, because in the Southwest, we have relatively low level of fossil fuel generation and a high level of solar generation. So the reality is that if you look at here, kind of 9 o'clock at night time, just shifting your electricity demand from then to kind of about 2 o'clock in the middle of the day can cut your carbon emissions by up to 50%, just by doing that, with no expenditure whatsoever, which is a quite significant reduction, potentially. This is averaged across the whole Southwest, so obviously it will vary from place to place. But in principle, that's a useful thing to appreciate. So matching that supply and demand is not just about how much we use, it's about when we use it. Evening peak, more carbon intensive, also more expensive, but more carbon intensive, shifting to the day, 50% cut. Importantly then, balancing supply and demand can also reduce the need to turn off renewables during times of low demand, as well as easing grid connection for new renewables. So if the challenge is to get more renewables onto the grid, then we need to think about this demand issue. So demand management is not just an issue for us in thinking about how do we reduce our fuel bills, which could be an issue, but it's also about supporting the decarbonisation of the grid and getting more renewables on the system. So how do we do that? Well, there are a number of ways. Behaviour change, basically just thinking, right, I'm going to shift when I use my electricity, is one way. And we're being encouraged in a direct sense with pricing mechanisms. This is one tariff. There are a number out there, increasing number of tariffs that change how much they charge based on the time of day. And you can see a massive difference, 3 o'clock at nighttime, 5 o'clock, 12 o'clock in the middle of the day, and then suddenly massive increase from 5-6 pence to over 20 pence per kilowatt hour, and up over 25 pence per kilowatt hour, and then down again. So providing direct financial incentives to shift when you use demand away from peak times. So it's behavior change with added incentive. Battery storage, I mentioned before, again, there's lots of issues with battery storage. We're not going to have time to go into the detail, but really interested in people's comments, in the chat, please do let us know what you think. In summary, again, I think battery storage has an important role to play. We're looking at battery storage now getting up to, I think the largest is 300 megawatts in the United States, so the size of a small power station, conventional power station. So we're talking about massive scale storage. all the way down to domestic scale and the sort of batteries in our EVs. But the challenge is, of course, producing batteries that are in a sustainable way, so don't rely on rare earths. We can create lithium, cobalt in a sustainable way. So we've got challenges at the moment with the current set of technologies, but technology is rapidly changing, and we will address those things, I'm sure. Only recently I saw that there's kind of serious potential for creating lithium from seawater, which would resolve a lot of the issues. But so storage plays a role. Smart technology is the bit that we're particularly focused on. So moving from behavior change when the reliance is purely on the householder to think, I've got to shift, to smart technology that takes some of that hassle away by automating some of that switching, but still within very clear limits set by the consumer, so you're not losing the level of service that you need. So when you get into your electric vehicle, whatever, it's still got enough electricity in there to get the distance that you want to. So flexibility, the idea of modifying our consumption patterns to better meet the needs of the grid, is something that is going to become, we're going to become a lot more familiar with as a term and as a concept. Historically, flexibility was provided by men in suits turning large power stations up and down by some of these dials that you can see in the photo there. Very straightforward process. Now we can't do that. Less reliance on central power stations, but as I said before, more reliance on decentralized, intermittent renewables that are far less controllable. So now we're moving to local flexibility markets where we have providers of flexibility that could be people who own generation assets, energy storage, large energy consumers who traditionally for many years now have been earning an income from turning their electricity demand down or up to meet the needs of the grid, and earning quite a lot of money. But up until recently, it's only been large consumers that have been able to do that. So the new flexibility markets are opening up that capacity to trade with the grid and earn an income down to a community and domestic level. So you will be able to trade your flexibility, your ability to be flexible with suppliers and DSO, TSO, distribution service operators, transmission service operators, the people who run the grid, who procure that flexibility. So from a BWC point of view, this is something that is becoming more real for us over the last couple of years. We've run a couple of projects. One's just about finished, one is underway, which I'll just talk about before. One that's finished, Solar Streets. We installed domestic solar and batteries in a range of properties, monitored substation level, and encouraged shifting at a behavioral level. This is one graph illustrating the shift in electricity, the blue line, from the blue line to the red line. And you can see that there's less demand during the peak times, more demand during the middle of the day. So it worked. Up to 20% demand shifted away from peak times. Major result, but it was only a very short period of time. This one, this example was only a week, and it was behavioral. And it's really challenging to sustain that sort of shift when you're just relying on behavior change alone. So that's where Flex Community comes in, the idea of automating that demand shifting process. So Flex Community is a new project that got underway last year. It's part of an EU-funded REDREAM project, funded through Horizon 2020. We're working with a wide range of European partners, and it's very exciting to see what's happening in other parts of Europe on this. It's also funded by Power to Change in the UK. And the focus is on identifying households that either have or are in the process of installing EV charging, electric vehicle charging, heat pumps, electric water heating, solar PV, and looking to add smart technology and a collaborative approach through engagement at a community level to shift demand and create this better balanced electricity grid and lower carbon emissions that we're talking about. The lead partner is an organization called STEMI Energy. They're a spin out from Camillus University in Madrid. And we're working with also communities in Croatia, Spain, and Italy. And as I say, really interesting to see different experiences from around Europe. So we've got some early results, admittedly small, only from 16 households, and just on the hot water heating side. The project, we hope, will grow to over 100 households, and as I say, include heat pumps, EV charge points, and the rest. But just from this very small test, which was basically just to test the system, make sure that the communications between householders to platform, cloud-based platform, and then from the cloud-based platform to the grid operators all worked. And so when the grid operator said, look, we've got a problem on the grid, can you turn down demand? They sent a signal to the platform, which then sent the signal to the householders, and then the smart technology changed the use of the hot water heating within bounds. So the householders had already said, we need to have hot water at this time. And so it created value in two ways. One was optimizing the shifting of the water heating to maximize use of on-site solar, if there was on-site solar, but also importantly to minimize standing losses. The software, the cloud-based platform over time learns the household behavior, has this artificial intelligence, algorithms, learns what happens, and then shifts the heating of the hot water to match when the hot water is actually needed. So instead of just the hot water coming on automatically at a particular time of day and then being on for 6 hours or whatever, it might come on only for 2 hours to match when the hot water is actually needed. So optimizing, reducing electricity demand, and flexibility, shifting demand in response to grid needs. So both of those things have value. One reduces the fuel bills, one creates grid flexibility. Overall, generated a 20-25% reduction in electricity bill, with flex payments effectively funding from the grid coming to pay the flexibility shift to compensate for where flexibility reduces the optimization. Because sometimes you might be shifting demand away from what is the most optimal. But interestingly, we don't yet know what the balance of the carbon impact of those two things is. And that's a critical thing and something that we'll be looking into in the pilot. Should we be focusing, maximizing optimization or maximizing flexibility? From a carbon point of view, we're not sure. So we're now open for more participants. Roll up, as they say. So we're looking for pioneers. I think it's fair to say our experience of this so far emphasizes the need for pioneers, people who are prepared to cope with a few glitches. This is a trial. It's not in its fully polished and finished kind of state. So things don't quite go as the way they're planned, like in any pilot. So we're looking for people who are prepared to accept that. It's like a beta testing of software with the caveat saying if things go wrong, you need to kind of cope with that. So there won't be major problems, but it just won't perhaps run as smoothly as we want. So we're looking for pioneers, people who are up for that, who are excited by doing new things and want to influence, importantly, this process. So the people we involved are effectively involved as co-producers in this process, testing the development of the service, and will become instrumental in helping us refine a service, which I think is an exciting opportunity for people who are up for that sort of option. So we're looking for people who've got a heat pump, EV charger, or main source immersion heater, not backup, or are planning to install any of those in the near future. Willing to have electricity consumption remotely controlled via digital technology within constraints set by you. And you have the potential to change those constraints over time if your needs change. So if you set something at the beginning, it doesn't mean, right, you said that, so hot water is always at that time, and that's it, lump it or leak, like it or lump it. No, the software is clever enough to adapt to meet the needs, and if your needs change, then you can factor that in. We want to test if we can develop a workable community end solution to this energy demand management issue. And for us, that's critical too. So by getting involved, you're helping us as community businesses test whether there is a viable community service here that we can roll out and replicate and become part of our core business over time. You will receive flex payments for participating. So if you can help us, great. Do you live in our area, which is the BWC patch, which is Bath and surrounding area? You can see here, this is Baines, West Wiltshire, Corsham, Bradford Navan, Trowbridge, up here, Marshfield, Coldaston, bit of South Gloss. So that's the BWC's area, or in the Mendip area. So we've got Wells, Glastonbury, Shepton Mallet, and over here, Wedmore, Sonia's patch. So if you live in either of these areas, kind of around the red lines, then do get in touch. If you're not quite sure, then let us know. We can check it all with postcodes. I better move on quickly.
Yes, I was just going to prompt you, Pete. You're nearly at the end of your time slot there.
Yeah, so I won't go into a lot of detail here. So
although it's good to show.
This is participants will engage this through a portal. STEMI Energy behind this have got their ecosystem, which is the cloud-based platform that does all the clever stuff. The front end, this portal provides a mechanism for householders to sign up, complete surveys around their home, what their needs are, and also importantly brings installers into the process. So if you're interested in installing, the portal will provide links to potential supply chain providers, installers, heat pump installers and the like, and importantly, installers that are offering smart technology, because not all heat pumps are smart enabled, not all EV charge points are compatible with this cloud-based platform. So the heat pumps tend to be at the higher quality end of the market in terms of the technologies. So we're not able to offer a full range because not all technologies are compatible, but we can offer some links here. So it also provides an ability and access to, as the system gets going, to feedback and the like and information. So summarize quickly, if we're looking to fully decarbonize the grid and get to zero carbon, which people say the electricity is the kind of first bit, the easiest thing to decarbonize, we do need to be more flexible. We can't avoid the fact that with the level of electricity that we use, we can't do that without doing it in a flexible way in the future. So whilst carbon intensity of electricity is falling rapidly, we're going to be using more electricity, so we're going to need more new renewables. And the higher the use, the more flexible we need to be. So I think that from our point of view, there is a clear challenge. We don't know all the answers of how this will all work, but we're very keen to play a part in testing the way forward. And we hope that you and others will join us and as part of this exploration to see and play critically an important role in developing new ways for we as collectively as communities can decarbonize. So We're recruiting. Do you live in the right area? Are you interested? Promote to friends, colleagues, and importantly, if you're linked into local networks, please do send information, let us know, and we can provide information that you might be able to send around to your networks. So contact Nick for more details and importantly, follow-up sessions. So you're interested, Nick and Alison run Zoom sessions, very informal, just kind of drop-in sessions really to find out more information. And of course, on our website is there. So contact details, our website. If you're interested in finding out more about carbon intensity on the grid, the Western Power Distribution, who's the local grid operator, have a carbon tracer app, which is interesting. You can look and download it on your smartphone or on your computer and can tell you in real time the carbon intensity of the electricity, albeit at sub-regional level. So sign up for a newsletter, join us in whatever way you can and help us on this journey to decarbonisation. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Pete. That was a amazingly useful presentation and really good to hear about the next steps in the Flex project. So the next part of the webinar, we're going to be opening up to questions, and I'd like to introduce our panel for this session. So we have Pete. We also have Alison Turnbull, who manages the Flex Community Project and including all of the liaison with the partner STEMI Energy as well. We have Alex Lockton, who develops renewable energy projects for Bath and West Community Energy and also has considerable experience around energy technology and engaging with the installers for that as well. And we also have our community engagement person, Nick, who's also involved in the project as well. So a great panel to answer your questions. I've been watching them as they've come in, but feel free to submit any more. We've got a good amount of time to take. We've got a half an hour now for questions. So no question is too small or too stupid to go in the question session. So please do put some more questions in as we're talking if something comes up. And it was great to see in the chat as well. Thank you, Rowena, for mentioning that you're a participant. It's good to have someone here who has can verify that there maybe have been a few glitches, but at least those have been sorted out. So I'm going to go into the questions now, and then we've got a mix of general questions and some more specifically around the projects as well. So the most popular question amongst our audience tonight is I have an older property that isn't very energy efficient. It isn't very energy efficient, and it also has gas central heating. I would like to change this and be made aware of any schemes locally. So there's a number of elements to this question. It's about looking at energy efficiency, but also if there's anything available at the moment for changing from gas central heating to an alternative source of heating. I think I'll start with Pete on whether you're aware of any other schemes around energy efficiency. I know that through the work, I also, as part of my day job, do work with Bristol City Council, and they are currently running a scheme for people to be able to switch away from fossil fuel energy systems or to provide funding for energy efficiency projects. And if you go into Bristol, you'll see posters and banners everywhere saying the council are offering free solar panels. So it's quite there are a number of public sector schemes going on. They are means tested, but there's some quite good levels of that. So there's definitely a number of grant schemes available through local authorities at the moment. But Pete, I didn't know if you'd heard of any other schemes, and then once we've talked about that, we'll maybe go to Alison and ask about energy efficiency and what she's seen in some of the homes that have been part of the scheme.
Kind of in terms of grant schemes, I mean, we're struggling, aren't we? Because the Green Homes grant scheme has failed, seemingly as a result of poor administration, not because there was a lack of demand, which is doubly frustrating, coming as it does after the previous government scheme on energy efficiency equally failed as a result of poor administration. And I don't quite understand why it should be so difficult to get grants out to householders, but it does seem to be the case. So at the moment, there isn't that sort of grant scheme available widely. However, some local authorities do have grants available, so it's worth checking whether your local authority has, because there is a local authority decarbonisation scheme, which so some of the funds that was meant for the wider scheme has been directed to that, and the local authorities are distributing it and administering it far more effectively. So it's worth checking that. And then there are kind of opportunities locally, Sonia, you mentioned. So there are some opportunities, but they're not nearly as available as you would like to think they would be.
No,
But,
I think so. Yeah, as you say, there were significant issues with green homes grants. Alex, I don't know if you want to mention anything around installers for this kind of work, or one of the problems that, or one of the criticisms that was leveled at the scheme was that it was quite difficult to get hold of installers to undertake energy efficiency or replacement heating system works under the scheme. And I don't know if you've got any comments around if people are looking for installers, if that is an issue at the moment or not.
Well, before I do that, I will just mention, it was just to build on what Pete was saying. Sometimes there are grants for fuel poverty in your local authority area. So in Wiltshire, the Warm and Well Wiltshire people bunch, they've got grants and things. So there are instances where you can get grants for energy efficiency for situations like that. There may be qualifying criteria, but they do exist sometimes. But in terms of installers, I spent a long time being an installer, and it's a rocky ride if you're dedicated to it. You really have to have a deep passion for it to stick at it, and some haven't. Some have got into it when the feed-in tariff started to grow, started looking at other technology. Quite a lot moved out of the market when it became unstable, and then some who stayed in have stayed in, but not many have added since. And the renewable heat incentive did help steady the market a little bit, but it's never been really a sort of silver bullet for really continuous growth of renewables and heat in particular. So it has always been tricky. And so to build a business plan around a market that's skewed by those sorts of subsidies as an installer is quite hard. So you will find that it is a little bit harder to find people that you need who know this stuff properly. We tend to look ourselves, first of all, at the microgeneration certification scheme website, where you can find registered installers who've been through had to produce a quality management system and proof of competency and that sort of thing. And there's a little map you can look at in your area and try to identify them and things as well. The other thing is that you still might find there's not as many as you like, so you may have to be patient, because they've quite often got big order books. If they're really good, they will have a long order book, and it is frustrating, but it's not their fault. There really does need to be better stimulus and more time given to have a proper implementation of a grant scheme like the Green Homes Grant. It was rushed completely, as Pete mentioned earlier, and that didn't help anybody really. And the money had to be spent too quickly. So I don't know how much further you want me to expand on that. I could talk about installers and installation forever.
Yes, I know. I picked the right person. Oh, Nick wanted to add something as well. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add, at the moment, I'm trying to pull together a sort of page of resources, ultimately to go on the website where people can go to for advice on this sort of thing. So, Centre for Sustainable Energy, Energy Saving Trust, etc. As it is, my draft has already had additions from the other members of the team. So if you can hang on for a few weeks, if you're not subscribing to our newsletter, I will alert people when that page is up. And then I've tried to sort of focus in on some of the sustainable energy things that people can do and where to go for the advice.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. That's really, really useful. Okay, well, I actually think we'll move on to the next question now from Steve. And Steve's question is, any ideas when battery prices will finally start coming down? Now, I suppose we could be looking, I am going to assume that we're looking at domestic battery storage here rather than grid or large scale battery. Alison, you were obviously working on managing the Solar Streets project, and did you get any feel for batteries and pricing, and whether the uptake was difficult because of pricing for batteries and things?
No, Sonia. I think when I was working on the Solar Streets project, we worked with Moitsa on 2 sizes of domestic battery, and they most certainly have come down in price in the last few years. I would think that there would be an opportunity for battery prices at domestic level to fall again. I think that we might find that resources could be a constraining factor in their price falling even further, the cost of lithium and things like that. So how much extra they could fall by, I don't know. And I think that there are good, batteries are not a panacea, they have their place, and we need to make sure that we carefully involve them in any kind of energy offering that we might be giving. I don't mean, when I say we, I don't mean BWCE or ACE. I mean that when we're thinking about energy, batteries in the whole total energy mix, they've got a role to play, but they're not necessarily an answer to everything. But I don't have a feel, I'm afraid, as to when I think what the prices will be doing for the batteries. I don't know whether anybody else out, whether Alex, you've got a feel for that.
You're seeing movement in the utility scale battery market. There's a lot of big projects being developed, so there's movement there. But at the small scale, residential scale, and even small business scale, this is not really a brilliant picture at the moment, and not really got a great deal of certainty. So I can't really add much more to what Alison's saying. It's a case of be patient, and there's plenty to do in most people's houses with energy efficiency, to be honest, before we get to even thinking about batteries. So
that's very true, and I agree absolutely with both Alex and Alison. I just add that the price that we were seeing of £4,000 or £5,000 for a battery when we started the Solar Streets, we're now seeing similar batteries at 3,000. That's quite a significant drop, as Alison says, in a relatively short period of time. But still, we need them in order to be kind of cost effective to fall by another third or even a half. So there's still some way to go. But you'd have to think that within the next 3 to 5 years, that it's going to be commercially viable. The question is, are we going to have the right technology?
Great. Okay. No, that was really useful information. Okay. Well, as I promised to take the questions with the most votes first, the next question coming up is asked what the panel's views are on nuclear. Now, we are giving this presentation tonight on behalf of Bath and West Community and Avalon Community Energy, and the panelists can choose not to answer this question because it is we are talking about home energy demand for greener grid. But if any of the panelists wish to present their views on nuclear as part of that transmission to a greener grid, then I'd be happy to take a response from maybe Pete.
Well, just a brief comment. I'm starting from the point that there's ideologically we can't be anti-nuclear just for nuclear's sake, but I think there are some major challenges. It's fair to say, trying to integrate nuclear into the sort of flexible grid that we're looking at in the future, even if we could address the waste issue, even if we could address the feedstock kind of sourcing uranium, even if we could address all those things, we're looking at a kind of electricity source that's not particularly flexible. And so whilst it can provide baseload, it just depends how flexible do we need the grid to be in the future. I mean, I think many people say that nuclear power is still important, who are looking at the forecasting of scenarios. I have a question as to whether it's ever going to be cheap enough to be able to utilize it at a high level, and whether it's going to be flexible enough to be able to be integrated. So that would be my comment.
No, that's a very useful comment, and I think it is a lot to discuss around pricing and the fact that onshore wind energy is almost, is under half the price of the cost of new nuclear that's coming on stream or may come on stream. So we should be focusing on solar and wind rather than nuclear. Yeah,
and if we've got 10 years to act, we're not going to be building much nuclear in that sort of timescale. No,
exactly. Okay, well, we've got quite a number of questions that either have one vote or no vote. So I'm going to use abuse my position as chair and pick some of those questions, which I think will be of use or interest to. I mean, all of the questions are interesting, but will help other people in deciding whether perhaps they want to apply for the Flex project as well. So we've got Alison, we've got a question here which says, I have an electric vehicle which I charge at home using a 3-pin plug, not an EV charging unit. Can I be a pioneer?
Yes, you can. We'll be delighted to have you join the Flex Community Project. So what you'd need to do is complete an expression of interest, if you haven't already done so, which is on the BWC webpage. We'll then ask you to complete an energy awareness survey, and then we will give you the link to the Flex Community portal. And when you get on the portal, there'll be some questions there that ask you about your EV and how you charge it. And then we will look at the answers that you've given us, and it is probably quite likely from what you've said, as you don't have an EV charge post in place, that we might be able to install something that will allow you to join the Flex community. Or indeed, we would also look at whether you would need to have an EV charge post installed to be able to help you join the Flex community as well. So there are different options that you can look at on the portal.
Brilliant, thank you. That was really helpful, Alison. There's an interesting question at the bottom of the question section, which I think is an important one for the panelists to consider. We are doing, by the transition to a greener grid through home use and electric vehicles, we're putting perhaps quite a lot of demand on the local grid networks through all of this additional electricity. And the question relates to, are the network operators, what are they going to do, if anything, to accommodate PV generation, electric vehicles and heat pump demands if there is a constrained area? And this particular questioner, he has got a constrained area in his village. Are they going to upgrade the cables? Alex, do you think you would be able to start us off on that one?
I think I know where you live, actually, so I recognise the name. And what I know of that area is that there has been some activity with people looking to try and look at larger scale projects in this sort of regional area around there, and to get more power to where you live in particular is a good example, actually, because you live in a rural area, and there are lots of rural areas of people within our sort of community area. The grid's not just going to go and spend a lot of money to upgrade all the cables. It's just not going to happen. They've got a 5-year plan that they roll over and put in new plans for upgrades in certain areas, and it tries to predict what demand's going to be based on what previous activity's been, with a little bit of foresight. But it doesn't just say, well, everyone's going to get an upgrade, and it would cost billions to do that. It's a very complicated issue, which is why the Flex Community Scheme is really very, very important, because actually you can't rely on an enormous budget somewhere that's ultimately going to come from taxpayers to suddenly upgrade everything. We have to do our bit too, and that's where flexibility comes into play in a big way. So if it depends on the sort of size of the project though as well. So if you're looking at a 5 kilowatt project, you might be absolutely fine. If it's a 50 kilowatt project, it depends on the wires and connecting transformers and things you've got. Again, it can be fine, but sometimes might not be. You may have to upgrade that. There may be a cost to that. Once you start getting bigger to that, it's over 200 kilowatts, particularly and above that, there will be charges. It's likely to be upgrades, because it depends. In your area, there aren't many big, from memory, there aren't many big users of power up there. So it's unlikely the infrastructure was designed for that in the first place. So to get more power there will be expensive.
And Alison, aren't you working with Western Power as well through the project, because they're interested in the constraints too? So
yeah, I would just add to what Alex has said as well. I mean, the flexibility option is just so important, because the grid upgrades, as Alex said, they're just not going to happen. So even though we're moving towards a greater electricity consumption, when we move over to electric heating, to electric transport, the demand is going to increase, but to just increase the grid, I just don't, to have grid upgrades, I just don't think they are going to happen. So the more flexible we can be, the better we can to save those grid upgrades. I mean, where there are really serious constraints, WPD would need to make an investment decision about that. But I think the more flexible we can be with our demand for electricity, the easier it's going to be on the grid. It's going to save costly grid upgrades, and of course the environmental impact from those grid upgrades as well, we need to take into account.
great, thank you. Well, we've had a question come up the charts, so I'll have to go back to my promise to answer those ones that have the most votes. So we've got a more general question now. What is the setup carbon cost of solar panels and wind turbines, and how long does it take to get to positive balance? Now, Pete, would you like to start us off on this one?
Yeah, so for winter, well, these are very, very generic figures, because of course it's totally dependent on the site and the technology. So please accept these as very kind of ballpark estimates. But research suggests that for wind turbines, you're talking about 3 months. It's months. With solar panels, it's a bit longer. You're talking 1-2 years, depends on the technology that's utilized. So certainly within, even for solar panels, you're going to repay it many, many times over in terms of the lifetime, the 30-year lifetime or more of the panels, which is of course obviously a critical thing if we're looking to decarbonize. It's a really important question, and something that we should be constantly asking ourselves: what's the embedded carbon in what we're doing?
Great, thank you. Yes, as you say, is a very important question that should be asked at the start of every project. What are the net effects of the project that you're doing overall? We have a question. Does the ban on gas for new homes in 2025 also apply to oil? Now, that is a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that. Does anyone on the panel know the answer to that?
I don't think it does, because you would get into immediate problems off gas grid, but I don't think it does. But I was going to say that I'm on the assumption that we don't get through all the questions. I think I'm happy to look at following up on some questions we don't get to, and we can certainly follow up on that issue and just answer the questions after the event.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't make any sense at all, but oh, Alex has got a comment as well.
Oil might be banned for new builds.
Oh yes, it's only for new builds. This is the ban generally is just for new builds. Yeah.
I think oil might be included in that.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it wouldn't make any sense if it wasn't, but it's not something which, yeah, I've seen. I mean, it's, you know, oil. We talked earlier about the property that wanted to come off gas, but oil is the area that I live in the Somerset Levels is predominant, mostly oil based, and it's even harder to look at solutions for those oil properties. So it's important to be able to find, and we've got lots people are looking. We've seen lots of increases in air source heat pump installations locally here, and people coming off oil, and it seems to be working quite well as a rural solution, as well as in conjunction with solar as well.
I think Alex is right. I'm quickly checked. You're right, Alex. I think. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously, Bath and West Community Energy and Avalon too get involved in quite a number of renewable energy generation type projects, and also research and look at projects. And we've been asked, have BWC given any thought to the thermal resource in flooded mines between Radstock, Midsummer Norton and Westfield? Now that is quite a technical question, but we do have a group within Bath and West Community Energy that does look into solutions and different technologies. And I don't know, Alex, if you're aware of whether the group have looked into any of that thermal resource.
We've looked at gravitational energy in relation to mines, but we didn't feel that some of the mines that were put forward at the time were necessarily deep enough, but there may be others we don't know about. In terms of extracting heat from them, we have had discussions about the warm air that comes out of vents that people might know of in some properties where they've got a mine underneath and that you've still got fissures where it comes through. And so there is something down there, but yeah, we don't know. We haven't necessarily got a specific project on that at the moment. So, but there is heat there to be used. So
definitely, yeah, and I know that Bristol are also looking at because there's plenty of mine shafts still in the area as well, at looking at the thermal capacity as well, and talking to various coal authority and others around that side of things too. So it's yeah, we need to grab the energy where we can get it, definitely. Oh, questions are jumping around a bit. I just have my next one lined up, and then I'll ask a quick one while I'm looking through. Alison, how many houses did you install with PV under the Solar Street scheme?
Off the top of my head, I think it was 7. Was it 7? Because we had 16 householders that participated that all got batteries, but some of them came already with PV installed. So I think it was 7 that we actually installed PV on, and the other 9 already had PV installed on them. Is that right?
I think it's 8 and 9, I think. Yeah, but roughly that, yeah.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
Great, thank you, that's interesting. Pete, in your presentation, you talked about behaviour change, and that was quite at the top of one of your slides in relation to this transmission to a greener and more sustainable way of living. And one of the questions asks, how far should we discourage individual personal transport, such as cars? I don't know how you feel about answering.
I think that's I think that's an excellent question, because I mean, again, if you start looking at the resource impacts and also the kind of energy demand of just switching all of the cars on the road from petrol and diesel to electric, it would be massive. It would be massive. So I think that there's a really important point in that question, that thinking about how can we collectivize some of the use of personal cars through car clubs, through car sharing. I think, and as well, kind of obviously looking at alternative uses, alternative approaches to transport, public transport, and cycling and walking and all of those sorts of things as well. So I do think that there's an important point there, that we can't just assume, like in many areas of this, that we just switch everything to electric or switch everything to renewables and just carry on as if nothing has changed. I think that's really important. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I mean, Nick, we're kind of looking at car clubs linked to the EV charging program, aren't we? So
yeah, we've had a couple of sessions with an organisation called Co-Cars, but we're looking at developing an electric vehicle charging network around, starting off in Bradford and Avon and surrounding villages. But some locals have been very interested in a car club, so we've sort of been facilitating them and sort of helping them. And one of the things, when we did a survey, we asked towards the end of the survey, which is essentially about electric vehicle charging, lots of questions about that. At the end, we asked about car clubs. I can't remember the actual amount that said they were really interested, but it was way above 50%. So yeah, a lot of appetite.
Great, thank you. There's a number of questions in the chat around alternative heating sources and heat networks. And Pete mentioned hydrogen in his presentation, and we also have an AD expert on the panel with Alison. So I was going to ask so the questions relate to biomass and AD. Alison, have you ever heard of any district heating systems running off AD? I mean, it seems like a good solution, but
yeah, I think it probably is a good solution. I'm not aware of any in this country. I think if you looked over the North Sea to some of our European friends, I'm sure that there are AD based district heating systems, simply because they're much more advanced in setting up district heating systems. And certainly in lots of Scandinavian countries, there are wood based district heating systems, so not AD, but burning wood, gasification of wood, to generate power to heat water for district heating systems. But I'm not familiar with any AD-based district heating system in this country. There's a lot of gas to grid AD systems going on, but they're not dedicated, that I'm aware of, dedicated district heating networks.
No, I mean, I think district and heat is obviously one of the, well, not obviously, but is one of the biggest issues we need to resolve in getting that to renewable energy and looking at communal systems as well as individual home systems too. I know I'm working on some district heating schemes within Bristol, which is moving off gas through to water source heat pumps and other solutions, and just excitingly ordered a 3 megawatt water source heat pump, which is the most exciting thing that's happened to me in a long time for the district heating networks in Bristol. So making use of what resources are locally, and I know we've got a group within the Bath and West Technology Group who have been looking at various district heating solutions for rural as well. So it's definitely another solution to look at, but I think at the moment we're definitely seeing the front runners as being the heat pumps. So and we have run a previous seminar on heat pumps, which is still available for anyone to view if they want more information. Nick, I don't know whether I've exhausted all of the questions. I'm scanning through, and I didn't know if you wanted to pull out any that I might have missed. We've had a question about someone who's very lucky and owns a Gilks Francis turbine. Bath and West Community Energy does have one hydro scheme, and certainly has included hydro within looking at feasibility for renewable energy generation within the Bath and West area. So maybe we can provide some tips on that after the event tonight, and put you in touch with the installer.
Yes, Hydromatch is the company that we're working with, who does the operation and maintenance for our water wheel, and they're very experienced on a range of different hydro technologies, so they may be able to help and give you advice on the restoration of your turbine.
Apologies, so go on, sorry, Tom. Pete.
I just noticed that there was a question from Joss Binns in the middle of the night when there is no wind, flexibility will do nothing to help fill the void. Where all the large-scale storage projects, which are the only other option unless we go to tidal, which reliable. I think that's a really important question. I don't think anybody is suggesting that flexibility is all that we need. I think Alison referred to kind of making sure that battery storage is in its right place because of the sustainability issues about it. I think our view would be that we need to be maximizing flexibility first through demand shifting, demand side response, and then use battery storage to fill the gap, rather than start with battery storage and then squeeze out the flexibility and over engineer the solution, if you like. But clearly there are times, and I noticed in the chat, John Twiddle took exception to me calling them intermittent and variable. I mean, yes, they're predictable renewables, but predictably not on all the time. So solar is predictable in the middle of the day, but you know it's not going to be there during the nighttime for obvious reasons. So we do need to find ways of matching the times when we're not going to get renewables, and large-scale storage is a major option. And as Alex mentioned earlier, it is the area where we're seeing a lot of action on batteries, where they are commercially viable. And yes, we're now seeing batteries in this country at 50 megawatts plus, and in other parts of the world at 300 megawatts. And I believe that that system's going up to 400 megawatts this year. So it's now technically possible to do battery storage at very large scale. So inevitably we will have that as well.
Great, thanks, Pete. I've been scrolling through again to check what I might have missed, and I've seen a question around is car to home technology available? Alex, I don't know if you wanted to take that one, if you were able to.
Yeah, there's a couple of EV charge points that claim to have some functionality, and there are some trials that have been going on which use that. WPD were also doing a trial with Nissan Leafs in certain areas in the West, looking for Leaf drivers to see if they can, well, if they fancy connecting their car up to try things as well. And there's if you look in a modern Leafs manual, owner manual, you'll see there's reference to an inverter and things that you can get for that. So it's fair to say it's very new, and it's probably not cheap. We are talking to two of the manufacturers that are doing that sort of thing, not principally because we're interested in doing that in the way you're describing it. We're interested in flexibility and working with electric vehicle charge points as far as the flex scheme goes. But it does happen that a couple of the products in their range do offer that sort of thing, and we will look into it at some point. But I can't give you much more information about how you get value out of that at this stage. So.
Great, thank you. No, that's very helpful. Well, I do believe we have pretty much.
I'm just thinking, interesting, might be worth a plug here. I've been looking at emails, so I might have missed some of these. Have we answered the question about are there any grant schemes for businesses to add solar power for Bristol-based companies? Because we don't cover Bristol, so it might be worth plugging our own community solar in our area. And then if people do know of any Bristol organisations that do this, is that worth it, Alex, Pete?
Yeah.
So, yeah, sure. Alex, did you want to talk about the solar roofs and businesses at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we offer a free solar for businesses, basically. And what that means is that we would design a system that would provide you free, cheaper electricity. We'd install it for free. We'd maintain it for free for 20 years and look after it all for you. So it's a fairly painless process. Normally involves a form of lease to lease the airspace. We only use really good quality equipment, so it's and very good installers with a really good track record. So one of our installers has won a large number of awards. Another one has installed solar at Twickenham and Wimbledon tennis grounds. So you know we only work with good people. So so we are very interested in taking on people in our area, and we talk to schools and we talk to businesses. We think there is a big gap in businesses not necessarily knowing about this. So if anybody does know people who are business owners or work somewhere and you go, I've got a really big roof here and we use loads of power, particularly in the summer, we'd be really interested in talking to you because it could knock a chunk out of your sort of ongoing overhead and, you know, green a chunk of your power supply as well, quite straightforwardly, really. So it is worth getting in touch.
Definitely, and Bristol, and I was just going to add, because the question was related to Bristol, there are similar organisations to Bath and West Community Energy within Bristol. So there's the Bristol Energy Co-op and the Bristol Energy Network, which is able to look into similar schemes as well for community-led solar projects, which yes, effectively, as Alex says, gets the businesses get the solar installation put on by the community energy organisation, and then you get charged through power purchase arrangement, and there's a lot of opportunity for that. For specific grants, there's if it's a public sector building, there are some grants available for solar at the moment, but for privately owned buildings, or for domestic buildings, there's very little available, as Pete mentioned earlier on, particularly on solar. So, if you are a business within the Bath and West area, then do register with the details that Nick put up and Pete put up earlier as well. So it'd be great.
And we have a webinar for businesses on the 15th of July, 11 o'clock. So if people are interested, they can always email me and I can send them the details if they know businesses would be interested to come along and hear about that.
Okay. Sonia, could I just pick up the question about, or comment about biomass?
Sure.
There's a comment, disappointed to see the biomass still being promoted. I guess the person's referring to the reference to biomass in the National Grid video. And I think there are genuine questions about biomass in terms of sourcing feedstocks, and particularly some of the large-scale biomass production that's linked to large power stations. There are some very real questions about that. But I think biomass could genuinely play a role where you're looking at sustainable management of woodlands. So, for example, one of the kind of issues around climate change, people are talking about growing far more trees, whilst there's an issue about timing for that. We are looking at increasing woodland cover. And so it's reasonable to think that you're also going to be producing thinnings. We could look at biomass from that point of view. There are sustainable ways of generating biomass feedstock as well. It doesn't have to rely on imported wood chips from Sweden or the States. So I think there are ways of looking at it, but there are big questions about making sure how, I think, I don't know whether Alison, you got any thoughts about that as well, but I think there are genuine questions about how it's done.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think, definitely gone are the days of cutting down forests to create wood chips that you then burn for power or for heating purposes, I think. But as Pete says, if you have arisings that come from sustainable forestry management and even non-treated waste wood management, then I think that they can have a role to play. So it's just finding out what resources are available and how best it can be used and used in situ as well. So to stop the transport of large quantities of fuel around the countryside or even between countries. So if it can be used in situ, all the better as well. So I think I wouldn't rule it out completely. It's on a case-by-case basis, I think.
Great, thank you for spotting that one. We've had a flurry of a few last minute questions that have just come in. Will we be running any training for people who want to do home thermal efficiency assessments? Nick, do you have any help or advice on that one?
We don't have. We're not planning to run training. There are a couple. Well, there's an organisation called the Cheese Project, which do that sort of thing. I think they recruit volunteers to do it. So I don't know if they are. If you just Google Cheese Project, I'm not sure whether they run training for people to do it themselves. But there's also an organisation called Go Green Widcombe in Bath that have done this sort of thing in the community, I think a couple of years ago themselves. So maybe one of those two might be worth looking at. I don't know if Pete has any other thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Yeah, nothing to add.
Great, thank you. And then there was a question about insulation. It's great that everyone's thinking about the energy efficiency works and taking that on board. And it is really important to get that right first. And so hopefully the resources, there'll be some resources that Nick's pulling together. And as Alex mentioned, it's working with installers and hopefully being able to provide a bit more information for those that are looking to do energy efficiency works and through the series of webinars that Bath and West have done, trying to provide more information. So if there's a really strong interest in having another webinar around energy efficiency, I'm sure we can look into that and maybe get some further speakers around like the Cheese Project or others who have done that type of work. So thank you for raising those questions. And thank you to everybody for a really, really amazing set of questions, which have run from nuclear all the way through to your 3-pin plug for your charger point for your car. It's been really wide-ranging questions, and I'm sorry there are a couple in there which we haven't answered because I'm not clever enough to even interpret the questions. So I'm sorry about that. We will look at those after the session and see if we can provide any answers. I wasn't ignoring you intentionally. It's just I thought it would be better for us to consider some of a couple that I'm not able to necessarily interpret. So we're going to wrap up the session now because we're nearly at an end.
Sonia, can I just quickly say, sorry to interrupt there. People should have had an email in their inbox at 8 o'clock. You were probably going to say that.
I was just about to say that. Yes.
There you go. You say it.
No, that's fine. So yes, there's a feedback survey, which would be really grateful if you could complete, and some follow-up information as well. We've had some great feedback from previous sessions we've held and set up new groups and new follow-up seminars from webinars from that information. So it helps us to understand what we need to do and to help those in the community who need more information. So thank you. And thank you very much to Pete, Alison and Alex for being on the panel and for taking such a wide range of questions and not shying away from any of them. And thank you to Nick for organising everything and making it all run as smoothly as always. And I wish you all a good night and